Number 1.
It was out of character for 53-year-old Geneva Verneal Adams to just hang out at a bar, but she loved to dance, so that's just what she did on the evening of July 24, 1976, the night she disappeared. Geneva was a religious woman, a devoted member of the Pentecostal church, who worked tirelessly her entire life raising 10 children in the working-class area of Festus, Missouri, taking jobs in factories and nursing homes. Her first husband, the father of her children, died of cancer in 1969. A brief second marriage ended in divorce. Geneva didn't drink, but since she liked to dance, she asked her daughter, Sheila, who was in her 20s at the time, to drive her to the Artesian Lounge in Herculaneum, Missouri, that Saturday night for an evening of dancing. Her son, Steve Crump, who was 17 years old at the time, was getting ready to go to his job at a local restaurant. Steve and his 12-year-old brother, Billy, were the only children still living at home. The others were grown and had started their own families. Steve still remembers his mother's mood as she left for the bar that night. "I hadn't seen my mom that happy in a long time," Steve told Dateline. "She didn't drink, but she loved to dance and was excited about going out." Steve told Dateline he felt his mother had been lonely since the death of her first husband and following her divorce. "She really deserved to have a good night out," Steve said. "It was really nice to see her so happy." But the next morning, Steve woke up to a silent house. He knew something was wrong. "I thought it was strange because our mom was always there to make us breakfast, and there was always coffee being brewed when we woke up in the mornings," Steve said. But that morning, nothing. After discovering that his mother had not slept in her bed that night, Steve called his sister, Sheila, who had gone dancing with her. Sheila told Steve that at some point during the night, she decided she wanted to go home. Her mother wanted to stay and continue dancing with a man she had met earlier in the evening. The man offered to take her home when Sheila left. Steve said at that point they began to panic and, along with a few of his siblings, tried to track down the man who had been with their mother. Steve told Dateline that bartenders at the Artesian Lounge told him that his mother had been with a regular named Jimmy Lee Mills, and that they left around 1 a.m. Steve said he later discovered that Mills was his little brother Billy's school bus driver in Festus. "As soon as we figured out who it was, we found out where he lived and went over to his trailer and demanded to know where our mother was," Steve said. Steve said Mills told them that he and Geneva left the Artesian Lounge and drove to another bar that was open late in East St. Louis near Illinois. He said he then dropped Geneva off at a donut shop around 4 a.m. in Crystal City, Missouri. Why would he drop her off at a donut shop in the middle of the night? "It makes no sense," Steve said. The family filed a missing persons report with the Herculaneum Police Department, and according to Chief Mark Tuljitsk, police at the time were told the same story by Mills. Chief Tuljitsk, who took the case on 15 years ago, told Dateline that Mills was questioned repeatedly, but insisted he didn't know anything. Jimmy Mills quickly became a person of interest in Geneva's disappearance, the chief confirmed. "Jimmy Mills has always been, and still is, our number one person of interest in this case," Chief Tuljitsk said. "But without a body, we have not been able to charge him." Chief Tuljitsk told Dateline Mills has an extensive criminal record including charges of rape and robbery. The chief said he also believes Mills is responsible for the deaths of multiple women. According to reports confirmed by Chief Tuljitsk, Mills was charged in the rape of a hitchhiker in Jefferson County 5 weeks before Geneva disappeared. He was out on bail when he met Geneva at the bar. 9 years later, in July of 1985, another woman with a connection to Mills disappeared, Chief Tuljitsk told Dateline. Cynthia Horan, 21, lived in an apartment building in St. Louis and shared a kitchen and bathroom with Mills. Investigators turned their attention to Mills, but after being questioned, Chief Tuljitsk said there was not enough evidence to charge him with anything. On July 30, 1988, a hiker in Jefferson County stumbled upon a shallow grave containing the skeleton of a young woman, according to Chief Tuljitsk. A forensic anthropologist built a clay model of the woman's face and determined it to be a woman named Julie Adams, who had been missing from St. Louis since March of 1988. But her family wasn't convinced it was her. Neither were police. In 2009, Chief Tuljitsk, who was a captain on the force at the time, along with St. Louis homicide detective Randy Sassinger and Jefferson County Sheriff's Lieutenant Eugene Doc Coombs, decided to test their theory that the remains really belonged to Cynthia Horan by comparing DNA from the remains with a saliva sample from Cynthia's brother. It was a match and her remains were returned to her family for a proper funeral. Julie Adams is still missing, Chief Tulgetsk said. Geneva's son, Steve, who is now 61, has been doing his own research on the case and holds on to every bit of information chronicling his mother's case. He told Dateline that Cynthia Horan's story gives him hope that his mother's case will one day be solved. It's been a roller coaster ride, Steve said. Just 44 years of ups and downs. Something happens and you have hope, but then you're let down again. It's tough. In 2018, police received some information and what they say has been the biggest break in the case yet. According to Chief Tulgetsk, the body of an unidentified Jane Doe had been found in September of 1976 in a wooded area of Washington Park, Illinois. That area is near where Jimmy Mills said they were going that night Geneva disappeared, Chief Tulgetsk said. Bars stayed open much later over there. The body was examined at that time, but was too decomposed to identify a cause of death, the chief told Dateline. Chief Tulgetsk said Jane Doe was buried in a private cemetery off a residential road in Fairview Heights and forgotten until 2014, when an Illinois State Police sergeant working to identify cold case remains ran Jane Doe's information through the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System database and came across Geneva's case. Steve told Dateline he's stumped on how the connection was not made before now. Chief Tulgetsk explained to Dateline that missing person cases were handled differently back then and that there was less communication between agencies. Investigators were able to obtain crime scene photos and limited records on where Jane Doe might have been buried, but the chief said all other evidence on her case was gone. According to the records, Jane Doe had dentures, reddish-brown hair and a small frame. It's mom, said Steve, who told Dateline he was able to view photos from the massive file that contains his mother's case. I just know it. I believe that's her. So in December 2018, authorities obtained an order to exhume the body from where records indicated Jane Doe had been buried in Greenwood Cemetery. But they came up with nothing. Steve was once again crushed with disappointment. It's so frustrating, Steve said. It's like you're reading a book and the last chapter is missing. Chief Tulgetsk said he believes the answers to Geneva's case are in that cemetery, but said the records are clearly wrong on where the body is and authorities don't plan to dig at this time. I'm 99% sure that Geneva is buried in that cemetery, Chief Tulgetsk said. But without a better lead on where her body is, we just can't dig up the entire area. He added that if the body of Jane Doe is found and identified as Geneva, it would give her family closure. We have been working on this a long time, and I want nothing more than to give this family closure and peace, Tulgetsk said. But he said that would not necessarily lead to a prosecution. We suspect foul play, but at the time the body was found, it was too decomposed to determine a cause of death, Tulgetsk said. At this point, the best we can hope for is a confession or for someone to come forward with information about what happened that night. The person of interest in Geneva's disappearance, Jimmy Mills, who is now in his 70s, was sent to prison on weapons charges in 2010. Chief Tulgetsk told Dateline Mills was interviewed multiple times while incarcerated, but refused to talk about that night in 1976. Mills was released in August of 2019, and Chief Tulgetsk said they do not know where he now resides. We keep hitting dead ends, Chief Tulgetsk said. But we want to solve this case. Our hope now is for someone to come forward. Someone with information about that night. Or about where this body could be buried. Geneva's son, Steve, continues to push on with his search for answers in his mother's case and is writing a book that he hopes will tell her story. I want to keep her story alive, Steve said. For her and for her family. Out of us 10 kids, only 6 of us are left. But we don't want our mother's story forgotten. We make sure to tell our children and grandchildren. It's not over until we find out the last chapter of her story. At the time of her disappearance, Geneva was described as being approximately 5'0" to 5'2" tall, weighing between 110 to 120 pounds, with reddish-brown hair and brown eyes. She was last seen wearing a blue tank top with a design on the front and blue pants made of a thin material. Anyone with information about Geneva's case is asked to call the Herculaneum Police Department at 636-479-4791.
Number 2.
Akers was last seen in Union, Missouri on December 11, 1988. He left home at 11:30 p.m. to borrow a chainsaw from a neighbor so he could cut wood for his family's wood stove. At midnight, he bought a 6-pack of beer at Mom's Hilltop Tavern in Grubville, Missouri. He never returned home and has never been heard from again. At 8 a.m. on December 12, Akers' wife of 11 years found his black Jeep abandoned just off Route French Franks at the entrance to the subdivision, where they lived with their 4 children. 4 cans of beer were inside the vehicle, and the keys were hidden above the sun visor. A search of the area turned up no signs of violence and no indication of Akers' whereabouts. Authorities believe Akers could have been the victim of foul play. He was involved with marijuana and methamphetamine at the time of his disappearance, something his wife was completely unaware of. He had been threatened prior to his disappearance, and after he went missing his wife had to move because she was getting threatening phone calls. Akers worked the night shift on the assembly line at the Ford Motor Company in Hazelwood at the time of his disappearance. His purchased Christmas presents for his children the day he went missing, and his wife does not believe he would have abandoned the family. His brother and sister-in-law think he's no longer alive. His case remains unsolved.
Number 3.
Nursing student Kelly Allen was visiting one of her female friends in Berkeley, Missouri on March 13, 2007. The 20-year-old had much to look forward to as she spent a few days at her friend's apartment. On the day she disappeared, Kelly reportedly went to a job interview that turned out to be successful as she'd scheduled a second interview by the end. She also had her $2,000 tax refund check in her purse, a nice chunk of change that has gone untouched. According to reports, Kelly Allen first went to her friend's house on March 7. On the 13th, Kelly's friend left for work in the morning, and all seemed well with the nursing home caregiver. The friend claims she spoke with Kelly during the day and they planned on meeting back up at home later on. However, when the friend arrived at her apartment, Kelly was missing. What aided in the mystery surrounding the circumstances is that Kelly's personal items, including that $2,000 check, were all left behind. Everything seemed to be in order aside from Kelly Allen not being there. Since 2007, Kelly's family has continued their tireless search for the young student. TV1 reports that Kelly's cousin Cody believed he once saw Kelly on a train. He took a photo of the unknown woman, but authorities still can't determine if the picture is of Kelly. Like many families, Kelly's loved ones hold out hope that she will return home alive. At the time of her disappearance, Kelly Allen was described as being 5 feet 4 inches tall and approximately 160 pounds. She had brown hair and micro braids and hazel eyes. Kelly had multiple tattoos, a rose on her left shoulder, 2 brown eyes on her left shoulder, and a half moon behind her left ear. Both of her ears are pierced. She didn't drink alcohol or smoke. Kelly was last seen wearing a blue blazer, apple-bottom blue jeans, and silver sparkly shoes. Anyone with information regarding this case is urged to contact the Berkeley Police Department at 314-524-3311 or their local authorities. Please share this story of Kelly L. Allen to reignite the investigation into her disappearance. She is our sister and her life matters.
Number 4.
Alsup was last seen in Williamsville, Missouri on February 17, 2017. A friend came to visit her at her home at 1 p.m. that day to check on her. She lived with her husband, Craig Allen Wood, in a camping trailer on Wood's parents' property. Alsup was freaking out and shaking and said her husband, Craig Allen Wood, had stolen money from her and cut up the SIM card on her cellular phone. She showed her friend the destroyed SIM card, as well as some bruises on her left cheek and arm, and stated Wood had pulled her off the bed by her hair. She borrowed her friend's phone, called someone, and told that person Wood had stolen money from her, and she was really scared. Later on the evening of February 17, a man came over to the home and saw Alsup and Wood there. He came back the next day and Alsup was gone, but he noticed her walker in the burn barrel, still burning. Alsup has never been heard from again. According to numerous witnesses, Wood and Alsup's relationship is described as stormy. On an unspecified date around the time of her disappearance, Alsup spoke to one witness on the phone and said Wood had been caught with drugs and wanted Alsup to become an informant, and that he had threatened to kill her if she didn't do so. She asked the witness to come and get her, but by the time the witness arrived at Alsup's home, he couldn't find her. The witness stated he had heard his own son, who had been around Alsup when she went missing, was forced by Wood to help dispose of her body. When police interviewed the witness's son, he said different individuals, whom he refused to identify, had used his car, and when they returned it, there was blood and hair inside it. Shortly afterwards, he cleaned and sold the car. When police located the person who bought the car, the buyer said it was extremely clean at the time of purchase. The buyer used the car for a while, but sold it to a scrapyard after it stopped working, and the scrapyard crushed it. Another witness stated that in 2016, Wood offered him 3 cars, a motorcycle and half of Alsup's life insurance policy, if he would shoot her. Wood asked the witness what would happen if bong water from a methamphetamine pipe was injected into Alsup's legs, and the witness replied that he thought this would eventually cause her death. He saw Wood with some bottles filled with bong water, and not long after this conversation took place, Alsup was admitted to the hospital, and both of her legs were amputated. While she was in the hospital, Wood attempted to have her removed from life support. The hospital refused to comply, as they knew this was against Alsup's wishes, and Wood could not prove at the time that he was her legal husband. After the amputation of Alsup's legs, Wood told the witness that he had gotten Alsup high on drugs and injected her with bong water, but it didn't kill the bitch. He told the witness there were many places he could hide Alsup's body where it would never be found. Another witness, who had shared a jail cell with Wood, said he saw him sitting on his bunk one night, crying about how he shouldn't have killed Becky. In July 2019, Wood was charged with first-degree murder and first-degree assault in Alsup's case. The assault charge was for the 2016 bong water injection. According to court documents, police believe Wood killed Alsup by striking her in the head with an ashtray. In September 2019, the charges were dismissed at the request of the prosecution. The prosecution stated they didn't have enough evidence, but planned to refile charges at a later date. Foul play is suspected in Alsup's disappearance due to the circumstances involved. Her body has never been found.
Number 5.
Brandon Terrell Bankhead was last seen on May 28, 2016, at his great-grandmother's funeral, which was held at Life Center International Church in St. Louis, Missouri. When the funeral service was over, Brandon was seen getting into a vehicle with some friends of his, and that was the last time that he was seen or heard from. The vehicle was described as a black 4-door car with tinted windows and black rims. None of Brandon's family members recognized any of the friends that he left service with, and the family members believed that foul play was involved in his disappearance. A few weeks after Brandon's disappearance, his mother received an anonymous phone call stating that her son was being held captive inside the closet of a vacant home in Walnut Park and that he was going to be killed. According to the grandmother, the caller said, "We got your son, we got him in a closet tied up, and we getting ready to kill him." It's unclear if this lead was ever followed upon or confirmed, and it's unclear if the family or the investigators believe that the call was authentic. Unfortunately, there are very few details available about the investigation, and this case is still unsolved to this day. Brandon Bankhead is an African-American male and was 19 years old at the time of his disappearance, and if he's still alive, he would be around 23 years old. He is classified as an endangered missing person. His height is 5'2" inches tall, and he weighs 130 pounds. His eyes are brown, and his hair was black and styled in a mohawk at the time of his disappearance. Also at the time of his disappearance, he was wearing a red hooded sweatshirt, a multicolored Burberry shirt, black pants and blue and white shoes, and his ears were pierced. Brandon had several tattoos which included a flame on his left wrist, the words "Rip Pusher T" on the inside of his left arm, the word "Game" on his left hand, the name Shanetta CTLL on the inside of his left arm, and T3 on his right upper arm. What do you think happened to him?
Number 6.
Cherie's mother and stepfather, Elizabeth Ann Turek Vassar and Larry Vassar, had custody of her in 1986. They moved from Nashville, Tennessee to St. Louis, Missouri that year. Elizabeth, who was also known as Sissy, disappeared from their home in St. Louis on December 1, 1986. She was discovered in the Mississippi River over 2 months later in February 1987 as the victim of homicide. There was no trace of Cherie at the scene. Authorities know that Elizabeth worked as a prostitute for her husband on Independence Avenue in St. Louis. She remained unidentified for 7 years until her family members contacted authorities and reported Elizabeth and Cherie as missing persons. The investigation into Cherie's case began at that time. Cherie was apparently last seen in Kansas City, Missouri with Larry on January 7, 1987. She disappeared from that location and has never been heard from again. Investigators located Larry in prison for armed robbery in the mid-1990s. He will be incarcerated until at least 2028. Larry told authorities that he knew where his stepdaughter was located. He has stated Cherie is being looked after by his family members and living under another name in the Kansas City area. She may not even know she is a missing child. At one point, Larry offered to give Elizabeth's mother photographs of Cherie and a recording of her voice if she paid him $500. Cherie was supposed to remain in the custody of other relatives after her mother's death. Due to the complexities in this case, Cherie's disappearance is classified as a non-family abduction, although her stepfather claims to know her whereabouts. Her case remains unsolved.